do you do, ladies and gentlemen? I'm back indoors again. It's quite nice outside in the garden today, except there's a strong breeze which will affect the audio. So I'll stay in. It seems like it's time I updated, or is that restated, my views on the real estate market, how it works, what to do, what not to do, and where are we headed now? We need to do what no other real estate so-called expert does, and we need to do that first. We need to define a few terms so we understand the different nuances and therefore the differing consequences of any actions we might take, and also try to be quite clear what we are seeking to achieve in the first place. It's probably 50 years since Bob Beckman produced his book on the real estate markets with the buzz phrase, "Your home is your nest, not your nest egg." For most people that is presumably true, but it certainly is not the whole truth. But it's as good a place as any to start this investigation. Most people reading this or watching the presentation will simply be average individual buyers who are looking to own their own nest. Many other people will be coming to this with all sorts of preconceived nonsense which is largely irrelevant and needs to be jettisoned. First, though, for those of you who don't know who I am, a brief introduction. After all, I have been at this for, oh dear, I don't want to say. It's so long. After all, what do I know that you maybe don't? Well, very brief history. We'll try and do this in about 2 minutes. I have been involved in real estate markets since the age of 12. I'm now supposedly retired, except, like most successful people, I prefer to go on being successful. It works. That's what I do. So why not? At the age of 12, I tried to help my mother buy a place called Brickendenbury. I'll bring up a few pictures of the place. I still regret not managing to get this, but I was only 12. It was for sale for the then huge sum of £15,000. Well, we didn't have that kind of money. But I was quite good with algebra, and I worked out a way we could buy it and get the parts we wanted, sell the rest, and pay off a mortgage. As I say in my main book on real estate, where I actually discuss this deal, the bank manager couldn't handle being told how a financial transaction could work by a 12-year-old kid. So we didn't buy the place. Great shame. Here's a picture of the main house. The next transaction my mother did worked out rather differently. I was older, but the bank manager still wouldn't lend to me, but he did lend to my mother based on my figures. At this stage, let's move perspective a little. I decided that as I had no money, I would build a house myself. We bought a ruin in deepest Somerset, or rather my mother did. I studied how to draw proper plans for the building inspector. I learned how to mix cement, bought a shovel, a spirit level, a few other tools. In short, I drew the plans, dug the footings, built the walls, put in the floors and the roof, fitted the plumbing and the electric circuits, and even ended up replacing the chimney pot. I then went out and did it again, this time as a job. My first venture was in the village of Hermitage, just north of Newbury. I built a bungalow at the back of some other buildings at the top of, Redshoot Hill? I then did it again. And again. The point I'm trying to make is that I know quite a lot about what there is to know about houses, how they're built, what they cost, what is the government's involvement, how the money side of things works, and how to make it all come together in terms of a successful project. And I have been involved in building and developing real estate in 9 countries on 3 continents. On top of the above, it was me who invented buy-to-let in 1991, when I moved into the depressed property market down in Hastings. I wrote a book on how to use buy-to-let to set up your pension. It's running mine quite nicely. I tried to get the book published in 1993 in the face of wholesale opposition from the publishing world. Basically, they said I was an idiot. I therefore published the book myself, showing how it was done, and it is now in its 3rd edition. You can actually buy the copy on, I think it's still available on Amazon. One more thing. I decided to go online back in 1992 with an online real estate market program. I had been online for over a decade using bulletin boards, and when the public data network morphed into the World Wide Web in 1991, I set up my stall on a site called The Well in San Francisco, moving my operation to the UK the following year when the UK went WWW as well. A year after that, I went public with the web's first real estate site called the Unique Property Site, which I still run. Okay, that's me in, 2-3 minutes. Now that's out of the way, you know a little about me. Let's get down to business. The first question we have to answer is, why are you buying a house? You could be looking to simply move house. You could be seeking to get a foot on the housing ladder. Or you may be wanting to start a rental business. Each answer would lead to a different set of requirements. Let's start with the first answer. If you're simply looking to move, there are really only 2 matters to consider. Are you going to do a straight financial swap? Or are you going to sell because property prices are high and you think they're likely to fall, so it may be better to sell now, then rent while prices fall, so you can buy back in at the bottom? I'd go for the latter, of course, but if the former, it doesn't really matter what you do because you're effectively swapping one set of circumstances for a similar set. If the latter, then you have your work cut out because you have to understand the possible dynamics, which takes us neatly into some basic metrics which you need to understand and be able to recognize. Understanding them should be reasonably simple. Recognizing them is not so easy. This is where we have to introduce several basic parameters which you need to understand. Yes, you need to understand. Don't understand these? You're buggered. First, you need to understand that real estate markets do not always go up. That is a fallacy. I once did some extensive testing on this matter. The longest peak to trough I found was between 1760 and 1945. In terms of relative buying power, house prices were the same on those 2 years. House prices do not always go up. There are 2 things which affect house prices. People give all sorts of absurd reasons for the way house prices move. There are think tanks with clever people, or supposedly clever people, who check out the various metrics they devise to get the ultimate best analysis. Every year since I've been measuring their results, and that's 50 years now, they've been wrong in their pronouncements, while I have been right. The number of people wanting to buy a house is one of their metrics. It's a meaningless number. How many people want to buy a fancy car? A meaningless question. You only buy a fancy car if you've got the money to do so. What you want simply isn't a meaningful factor, so we can throw that one out. How many people are there in relation to the number of houses available? Another meaningless number. Kids who have no money stay at home with their parents. People who have no money or no job won't be eligible for a mortgage, so you can take them out of the equation, and so on, and so on. The only meaningful factor in terms of house prices is the number of people who are both able and willing to pay the prices asked. Everything else is irrelevant. You can get quite sophisticated in these terms, but a simple metric gets you a good enough handle on where house prices are going at any time. If the economy is going well, wages are going up relative to prices, and potential buyers have the disposable income, then house prices are likely to rise. There is, however, one metric which does tend to interfere with this simplistic approach, and that is interest rates. Let's go back a bit. In 1760, the only way you could buy a house was if you had the money to do so. Things started to change quite considerably when it became possible to borrow money. The purchasing metric changed. The money you had in the bank retained a certain importance, but an extra element was added in the purchaser's favour. What was the buyer's income, which could be set against a mortgage? This metric itself also changed over the course of the last century. Initially, you could only borrow a small percentage of the price of a house. That percentage went up and up as the century moved on. It even became the norm for a short while for banks to offer 110% mortgages. Under such circumstances, the number of people who could buy a house went from a very small number to almost everyone who had a reasonable income. What this means is that henceforth one of the most important metrics to consider when buying a house is the state of the economy, plus knowing where interest rates are, historically speaking. This has led me to state what is one of the most important rules when considering buying a house. And hardly anybody pays any attention to this fundamental rule. Ideally, you buy a house when interest rates are high but falling, not when they are low and can only rise. Putting this another way, you should enter into a long-term financial arrangement when the cost of that arrangement is likely to fall rather than it can only rise sometime in the future. And of course, you don't know the future, so what are you doing taking on the biggest financial decision in your life, probably, when the continuance of that deal is based on guesswork or luck? An ideal test would be to look at a chart of long-term interest rates. A modern chart would show a long-term decline down to what were effectively negative interest rates when set against inflation. The joke is that although they are rapidly rising at the present time, they're still lower than inflation. But the important issue is, how do those rates affect someone's ability to pay? Let me assume someone has a £200,000 mortgage bought when interest rates were, 2.5%. That would mean the notional annual interest would be £5,000 a year, or £100 a week. That's on top of your monthly repayments. Such a mortgage would now be subject to a 6% interest rate. That works out at £12,000 a year, or approximately £250 a week. The cost of your mortgage has more than doubled. In 1760, what mattered was the relative cost of the house. What matters today is the relative cost of the mortgage. That's now the cost of your house, the cost of the mortgage. In 1760, the important financial question was, could you pay the money on the day you bought? What matters today is, are you likely to be able to pay the monthly interest plus the monthly repayment if interest rates rise? And are they likely to rise? I'll unpick this and its consequences next week. Meanwhile, have a great week. See you later.